They called it a scientific marvel, an anthropological find buried deep beneath the Siberian permafrost, preserved for eons, untouched by time. But what they unearthed didn't belong to the past. It didn't belong to Earth. The journey was supposed to be routine: transport the specimen by train, deliver it for analysis, and make history. But the moment that crate was loaded onto the express, history rewrote itself. Eyes went blind, minds emptied. People forgot who they were, not because they were afraid, but because something inside the train was learning them, studying them, hollowing them out. And as the train charged through the snow, the film did the same, carving its path in shadows and silence. Horror Express wasn't a grand production. It was stitched together from recycled sets, fueled by actors carrying grief and exhaustion. No studio believed in it. No one expected it to survive, but it did. And the longer it lingered, the stranger it became. Behind the scenes, film reels vanished. Blood turned real. An uncredited actor sweated through a mask that nearly suffocated him. And in one moment never explained, a voice not belonging to any cast member was recorded in the final mix. This wasn't just a film about possession. It was a film made by people haunted and maybe something else watching. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Horror Express. 1972. Fact 1. Nothing on that train actually moved. Every groaning wheel, every rattle of metal, every corridor that seemed to stretch for miles, all of it fake. The train in Horror Express wasn't a train at all, not in the way you'd expect. It was a static collection of set pieces built inside a rented soundstage in Madrid. Just a handful of walls, doors, and compartments recycled from other films, constantly rearranged like a theatrical jigsaw puzzle. There were no real carriages, no railway tracks. The illusion of movement came entirely from clever direction and sheer discipline. The actors rehearsed their body sways like choreography, each lean timed to sound effects that mimicked the gentle rock of steel over rail. A single mistimed step could shatter the illusion. To enhance the effect, the sound team created a continuous low-frequency rumble layered under every scene, more felt than heard. They couldn't afford a real locomotive, so they engineered a space that felt like one. Not through grandeur, but through confinement, long, narrow shots that made the viewer feel trapped. And maybe that was the point, because this wasn't a journey about reaching a destination. It was about what gets inside when you're locked in with no way out. Fact 2. His sorrow wasn't written in the script. Peter Cushing arrived on set with a suitcase and a broken heart. His wife, Helen, had passed away shortly before filming began. They'd been together for over 25 years. He was shattered. And when he stepped onto the Horror Express set, he didn't come to act, he came to quit. He told the producers he couldn't go on, couldn't pretend, couldn't summon anything beyond silence. But Christopher Lee, his oldest friend in film, asked him to stay, not for the movie, but for himself. He reminded Cushing that grief could be carried differently, not ignored, not erased, but channeled. Cushing stayed, and in doing so, he gave a performance unlike any other, quiet, reserved, hollow, in places where other actors might have reached for melodrama. His eyes don't just reflect fear, they reflect someone who's already seen loss and knows it always returns. Behind every line he delivers is something unsaid. He didn't act the part, he lived through it, one scene at a time. Fact 3. The creature was never meant to have a body. It's easy to be fooled by appearances, and Horror Express knew that. At first glance, the creature looks like a typical monster, frozen in ice, ape-like, menacing, but what's actually being transported on that train isn't a corpse, it's a presence, a consciousness, something ancient and untethered, using bodies as temporary shelters. The script never fully explains its origin. It doesn't have to. What matters is its ability. It steals memories, drains identities, occupies minds like an invading thought that refuses to leave. Its first host is prehistoric, the next, human, the next could be anyone. And that's where the true horror lies. Not in its appearance, but in its intent. It doesn't kill for pleasure. It studies, it collects, it learns until it knows everything you know, and then removes you from the equation. It's not a beast, it's intelligence without empathy, and it's always looking for its next home. Fact 4. The glow came with a cost. Those burning red eyes, the signature of the creature, silent, glowing, watching. They give the impression of otherworldly power, something mechanical or supernatural. But what powered those eyes wasn't visual effect, it was heat. Inside the mask, small, high-voltage bulbs were rigged into the eye sockets. They were wired to external batteries strapped to the actor's body, and under those hot studio lights, the temperature inside the mask soared to unbearable levels. The actor, still uncredited to this day, could only wear the setup for minutes at a time. He sweated through the costume, struggled to breathe, and often stumbled blindly across set with only vague direction from the crew. The suit's visibility was poor, the air circulation worse. What looked like a cold, calculating creature on film was actually a man close to passing out. The eye flicker that became part of the creature's personality? Unintentional. It was the result of a faulty wire shorting mid-take. The director kept it in because it made the alien force feel even more unstable, as if its energy couldn't be fully contained. The result? One of horror cinema's most chilling stares, burned into film and nearly into the actor's skin. Fact 5. The most disturbing prop was a real organ. There's a particular moment in Horror Express that lands harder than any jump scare. The reveal of a smooth, featureless brain inside a cracked open skull. It's an image that suggests the mind has been erased, wiped clean like a chalkboard, and it wasn't a rubber mold. It was a real brain. The team obtained a cow brain from a local butcher, coated it in a gelatin-based solution to give it an unnatural sheen, and meticulously shaved down its folds with scalpels and heated tools. What remained looked alien familiar, yet utterly wrong. The science behind it? Pseudoscientific speculation. A theory that knowledge could be physically worn down by a parasitic force. That intelligence could be absorbed, leaving behind a blank organ with no more purpose. To sell the effect, the director captured it in extreme close-up with clinical lighting. One actor broke character and looked away. The prop looked too real. Because it was. The horror wasn't in the idea. It was in knowing the idea had a pulse. Fact 6. A familiar story in an unfamiliar place. When Horror Express quietly hit screens in 1972, many viewers had a strange feeling. They'd seen this story before. A body found frozen. A shape-shifting entity. A remote environment. A creeping sense of paranoia. It felt familiar. And for good reason. Though uncredited, Horror Express was heavily inspired by Who Goes There?, the same novella that would later become The Thing. But instead of an Arctic research station, this story unfolded inside a confined, rattling train crossing Siberia. No snowstorm needed to isolate the characters. The walls did that already. The creature wasn't identical, nor was the tone. Where The Thing leaned into visceral terror, Horror Express leaned into existential dread, Cold War suspicion, religious anxiety, scientific overreach. But the DNA is there. A shared blueprint, a hostile intelligence, a group of humans slowly losing trust in one another, a question with no answer. Who's still human? And what happens when you realize the real monster is already looking back at you in the mirror? Fact 7. The movie was held together with scraps and hope. When watching Horror Express, it's easy to be fooled by its atmosphere, the flickering lights, the convincing train interiors, the sense of place. But that illusion was built on next to nothing. The film's budget was barely enough to sustain a full shoot. Reports estimate it hovered somewhere around $300,000, a laughable figure, even by early 70-second standards. Every element was cut from corners. The train was just a few redressed sets shuffled between takes. The snowy exteriors were miniatures filmed in a refrigerated box with bags of flour. Military uniforms were leftover wardrobe pieces from other films. Rifles were carved from wood and never meant to be seen up close. The crew used whatever they could get their hands on, often reusing props within the same scene from different angles. Lighting rigs doubled as set decoration. Even the fog effects were manual, created by puffing cigarette smoke into the frame and fanning it out of shot. And yet, it works, because horror doesn't require scale. It requires tension, atmosphere, and conviction. And Horror Express had all three built from scraps and stubborn belief. Fact 8. The music sounded too expensive to be real. There's something unsettling about the opening theme of Horror Express. It doesn't feel like it belongs to a cheap horror film. It feels orchestral, deliberate, the kind of score you'd hear in a big studio thriller, not in a movie made for pocket change. That's the work of John Kakavas, a composer who had never scored a monster movie before. He approached the film as if it were a psychological mystery, not a schlocky creature feature. His melodies were haunting, almost melancholic, and they gave the film a weight it otherwise couldn't afford. The producers nearly didn't use it. They considered replacing the music with stock tracks from a public domain library to save licensing costs. But Christopher Lee reportedly stepped in, calling Kakavas's score the only thing keeping the film grounded. They listened, and it made all the difference. Horror Express might have been made on a shoestring, but it sounded like it came from a symphony hall lost in the dark. Fact 9. Faith turned into fanaticism on purpose. At the heart of Horror Express is a priest, but he doesn't offer comfort. He doesn't guide others through the terror. He doesn't resist evil. He embraces it. Father Pujardov begins as a timid presence, pale, nervous, quietly disturbed by the unnatural events unfolding. But as the story unfolds, his fear becomes belief. His doubt transforms into loyalty not to God, but to the creature itself. He calls it divine. He worships its power. He defends it. The writers weren't just trying to shock religious audiences. They were making a point that when people are desperate for meaning, they'll follow anything that gives them a sense of order, even destruction. This portrayal sparked backlash. Religious organizations in Spain, Italy, and Ireland protested the film's depiction of clergy. In some cases, lines were redubbed or cut entirely for TV airings. But the message remained. The priest doesn't lose his way. He just chooses the wrong thing to believe in and calls it holy. Fact 10. He collapsed in character, and they kept it. There's a scene in Horror Express where a character walks unsteadily through a dim corridor, eyes glassy, sweat dripping, words slurring as he mumbles about what he's seen. It feels like terror. It feels like possession. It was exhaustion. Actor Angel Del Pozo had been filming for nearly 16 hours straight, in heavy costuming under hot lights and recycled air. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't rested. He'd been pacing the same stretch of narrow set for take after take. And in one of those takes, his body gave out, but the director didn't yell cut. To the camera crew, it looked like brilliant method acting a descent into madness captured with chilling realism. Only when Del Pozo collapsed behind the set wall did someone realize he wasn't performing. They revived him, let him rest, but the footage stayed. The scene made it into the final cut unaltered. What audiences witnessed wasn't a horror character breaking down. It was a man reaching the edge of physical collapse, caught between fiction and failure. Fact 11. The thing never had a face. You remember the monster, don't you? The creature in the crate. The one with the red eyes and frozen features. That wasn't it. That was just the host, the first one, the shell. As the story progresses, the real horror reveals itself not through transformation, but through transition. The intelligence moves from one body to another, like an idea, switching speakers. A whisper passed forward, a thought with no boundaries, and you never see its true form, because it doesn't need one. By the third act, you're not afraid of what the creature looks like. You're afraid of who it might be hiding inside the conductor, the officer, the scientist beside you. Horror Express never gives you the satisfaction of a final monster reveal, because the scariest monster is the one that doesn't need to show itself anymore. Fact 12. The missing reel that might have changed everything. Somewhere deep in the production logs for Horror Express, there's a gap, a segment referenced in shooting notes, scene outlines, and early storyboards that doesn't exist in the final film. It was a sequence involving a military compartment aboard the train, one that carried a mysterious Soviet device designed to measure anomalies in the Earth's magnetic field. In this scene, the officers realized the field spiked the moment the frozen creature began to thaw. The implication? The being was being tracked. Or worse, expected. But that scene is gone. The footage was never found. No script pages remain. No footage survived. Even the editor wasn't sure if it had ever been completed. All that's left is a production photo. A crate covered in frost, a man in uniform shielding his eyes from an unseen glow. Was it lost in editing? Or was it something they chose to erase? All we know is that the train might not have been carrying a mystery. It might have been carrying proof, and someone made sure it never reached the station. Fact 13. It became a legend without a platform. Most cult classics are rediscovered. Horror Express was passed along like a rumor. After its modest theatrical run, the film slipped into obscurity. No re-releases, no studio push, no cable deals. For years, it floated in a limbo of forgotten reels and bad transfers. But horror fans kept it alive. Copies were dubbed from TV broadcasts, traded at conventions, or found in dollar bin VHS tapes under alternate titles. Some people didn't even know what film they were watching, they just remembered the one with the train and the eyes. It became myth by misplacement, a film you didn't find unless it found you first. And when better quality versions began to surface decades later, a strange thing happened. Audiences already knew the beats. They had memorized the shadows, even through the static. This wasn't a film that rose from the dead. It was one that never truly died. Fact 14. The actor inside the monster suit never spoke again. He was the one inside the fur, the mask, the wires, the suffocating heat and flickering red eyes. He performed the creature's movements, took the hits, hit the marks, and vanished when the credits rolled. His name was Juan Olaguivel, And Horror Express was one of the last films he ever worked on. Why? Because no one remembered him. He went uncredited. His work was praised, but not attributed. The monster became iconic, faceless on screen and faceless in memory. While Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing were immortalized, he disappeared into the background. The suit nearly cost him his vision. The role never earned him a second one. He gave the creature its shape, but he left the train with nothing but bruises and silence. Fact 15. One frame defies explanation to this day. There's a moment in Horror Express, not even a second long, where the screen bends. It happens during one of the possession transitions. The film flickers, the lighting distorts. A figure seems to appear in the background and then vanish. It's easy to miss, but once you notice it, you can't unsee it. The restoration team caught it first. When reviewing the negative for remastering, they paused on that frame. It didn't belong to any camera setup. No record of the shot. No matching props. No one on the crew remembered filming it. Technically, it shouldn't be there. Some blamed damaged film stock. Others whispered about production interference. But the editor had the final word. I don't care how it got there. I care that it feels like it wanted to be. One frame. No source. Still unexplained. Fact 16. A line too personal to deliver. Christopher Lee had delivered thousands of lines in his career. Declarations of doom, whispered threats, ancient incantations. But on the set of Horror Express, one simple line left him speechless. It happened during a quiet scene. His character reflects on loss, a passing comment about the death of a child. Nothing dramatic. But Lee froze. He tried again and again. He couldn't get through it. What no one knew at the time was that Lee had recently experienced a family tragedy, one too raw to name. That line, that moment, cut into something that had nothing to do with the script. He left the set without a word. It was Peter Cushing who sat beside him in silence, both of them carrying their own grief in different shapes. No advice, no rehearsal. Later that evening, Lee returned. He said the line with no inflection, no emotion, just cold, flat delivery. It's chilling. And it's real, because sometimes the scariest thing an actor can say is something they weren't ready to say at all. Fact 17. The actor who couldn't leave the character behind, Alberto de Mendoza, played the priest. But after filming, the priest didn't let go. The role of Father Puhardov demanded a descent from nervous religious advisor to full-blown zealot, willing to serve an alien intelligence he mistook for divine judgment. It was extreme, intense, a transformation that required total surrender, and Mendoza gave it. Too much, perhaps. He studied cult behavior, spoke with ex-members of extremist sects, locked himself away during breaks, repeating lines under his breath. By the third week of filming, crew members noticed he was eating alone, speaking less, smiling less. In interviews years later, Mendoza admitted he never fully liked the character, but he understood him, and that was the problem. He said, "Once I understood how he thought, I started hearing his voice in my own. That voice never returned after the shoot, but for a time, it followed him like a shadow on the platform." Fact 18. Blood that spoke for itself. It dripped. It stuck. It didn't shine under lights like syrup or dye. It looked real. Because it was. To save money and get more texture on camera, the effects team in Horror Express used real animal blood, purchased fresh from local butchers. It was mixed with thickeners to keep it from clotting too fast, and applied generously to faces, clothing, and props. At first, the result was spectacular. It read beautifully on film, but then came the smell, the heat, the stinging in the actor's eyes. On one particularly warm day, the scent became so overwhelming that a crew member vomited off camera. Christopher Lee, ever composed, allegedly refused to speak between takes, simply standing still, blood drying across his shirt, waiting for the next call. Eventually, synthetic substitutes replaced the worst of it, but by then, the damage was done. The blood made the horror believable, and it made the set unforgettable. Fact 19. It was saved by a train museum. The original negatives of Horror Express are gone, destroyed, misplaced, or simply thrown out. No one's entirely sure. When the production company folded and rights bounced across borders, the film reels became collateral damage. For decades, the only versions that survived were degraded VHS tapes, overexposed television copies, and bootlegs with missing scenes. Then, someone opened a storage box at a small railway museum in the UK. Inside was a 35mm print labeled only Siberian Transport, 1,970 seconds. It had been donated years earlier as part of an exhibit on trains and cinema. The curators never watched it. They didn't know what they had, but a visiting archivist did. What they found wasn't perfect faded colors, scratched edges, but it was complete. It was enough to restore the film to something resembling its original shape. That version, the one we can now watch in HD, only exists because a train museum, of all places, unknowingly became the creature's final carriage. The film almost vanished. Instead, it waited on a shelf, behind glass, under dust. Fact 20. The final shot wasn't written by anyone. The ending of Horror Express doesn't resolve. It lingers. The train crashes. Then, we see it adrift in space, surrounded by stars. Frozen, glowing, silent. It's not part of the narrative. There's no explanation. It just happens. That's because it wasn't in the script. The director, dissatisfied with the conventional finale, made a late decision. He found unused footage from a Cold War-era Soviet short, a model train used in an experimental animation sequence. He cut it into the end, slowed the footage, layered it with the score, and said nothing to the studio. The reaction? Confusion, then fascination. Some said it was symbolic, the train as memory, lost in time. Others believed it meant the creature escaped, taking the whole world with it. But no one ever gave a definitive answer, because some horrors don't end, they just change tracks. Bonus fact: the sound engineer still won't talk about it. During a routine sound mix, something interrupted the silence. Peter Cushing had finished re-recording a line in a quiet scene. The dialogue was clean, the room was locked, no other mics were live. But when the sound team played it back, they heard something else underneath. A low whisper, too soft to make out, not part of the script, not an echo, not an effect, just a voice. Faint, guttural, almost like breath, forming a word that never finishes. They checked the equipment. Nothing. The track was clean. The sound didn't exist on the waveform, but it played every time. Same spot, same intensity. Cushing listened. He didn't blink. "Leave it," he said. "It fits." The sound engineer decades later refuses to say what he heard, but he won't rewatch the film. Some believe it was an accident. Others believe it was something else. Speaking back, maybe the train never stopped. Maybe the scream buried in the reel was never meant to be heard. And maybe some stories weren't supposed to be told. But here we are. If Horror Express 1972 left something lingering in your thoughts, tell us, which fact shifted the way you saw the film? Which one left you questioning what's real? Leave your theory in the comments. Suggest the next forgotten film we should dig up. And if you haven't yet, subscribe, and stay close. The ride isn't over, the tracks go deeper, and something else may already be on board.